All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the chill stream. Welcome to Clumsy Clairvoyance. Just a forewarning, this is the chill stream. Right. Oh, wait. Crap, I hear myself in the background. This is the chill stream. Welcome to Clumsy Clairvoyance. That was on my phone, too. How weird. I was like, where is it coming from? Oh, I'm such a boomer. I'm such a boomer. It's not a boomer. Okay. But yes, this is the chill stream, just so everyone knows it's not the review stream. Um, so yeah, thanks for chilling. Thanks for being here, y'all. We're gonna watch um scary, interesting. Oh yeah, let me drop his link in chat. You guys can sub up to him. He is worth the sub. So this one looks like a good one. So this one is a collection. So you know how he usually does that collection of horrible fates? This one is a collection of, it's like a special one, a collection of insane survival stories, it looks like. But yeah, he does good content, so we're watching him tonight. It just dropped like the other day. I was hearing voices again. You were. I couldn't find where my voice came from either. I was like, oh, hold on, wait, because it wasn't on my laptop. Loud and clear. Okay, good. Oh, is it too loud? Do you want me to use whisper voice? I can use soft voice. That was hard practicing that quiet voice so for a long time. But then I kind of got used to it. But I don't know. Okay, so let me know though if you guys can see. I am sharing the screen like kind of to the side. It's kind of small right now, but let me know if you can see it. You guys see it? Just give me a thumbs up if it's sharing, okay? Oh, I got rid of me. Okay, I'm gonna hit play. Tell me if you can hear it too, y'all.
To go to make it out or not. As always, viewer discretion is advised.
Okay, let me know if you can hear it too, okay, Phyllis? Please, thank you, lovey. Oh, that's so awesome. You have a new sub, Mr. Malloy. I think you went to sleep, but you'll have a new sub when you wake up. Come on, can y'all hear it too, though? Let me know. Please. All systems go. Okay, thank you, lovey. Thank you. Okay, again, so this is Sean from Scary Interesting. I dropped his link already in the chat. I will drop it like a few other times. Drop it like it's
In this video, we're going to look at 3 people who found themselves in horrifying and impossible situations and the lengths they had to go to make it out or not. As always, viewer discretion is advised. In 2022, the Grimes family wanted to do something different for Thanksgiving, and because they were a big family, getting 18 people around a single dinner table wasn't easy. That year, they'd seen a 5-day Thanksgiving cruise across the Gulf of Mexico to Cozumel, which is a small Mexican island, and decided that it looked like a great way to enjoy the holidays. They could all celebrate together, have a good time, and let someone else do the cooking for once. So on the day before Thanksgiving, they boarded a cruise liner, the ship set off, and right away they began to enjoy the shows, music, dancing, and a few drinks. One of the family, James Michael Grimes, found out that an air guitar competition was happening later that evening, and air guitar just happened to be James's party trick. Because the prize was a free drink, there was no way he could let it go to someone else. So when it was his turn, he air soloed his way around the room with enough style and energy to impress the judges. This ended up winning him the free drink, and then afterward, he joined his family and partied some more. At about 11 p.m. that night, he needed to use the bathroom, so he told his sister where he was
It's gonna be one of those what we did do for a free drink stories.
drink. There was no way he could let it go to someone else. So when it was his turn, he air soloed his way around the room with enough style and energy to impress the judges. This ended up winning him the free drink, and then afterward, he joined his family and partied some more. At about 11 p.m. that night, he needed to use the bathroom, so he told his sister where he was going and headed for the washroom on the deck just outside. Unfortunately, he never made it to the washroom. Instead, James passed out and fell overboard somewhere between heading out and opening the bathroom door. A little while later, he woke up floating in the ocean with the ship nowhere in sight. Those first moments after waking up had to have been completely terrifying. There was no light or land in any direction, and he also had enough wherewithal to vaguely remember the route of the ship and knew that he was way too far into the Gulf of Mexico to swim to land. This meant that his only hope was to tread water in the darkness and hope that someone noticed he was missing. Incredibly, despite the circumstances, James was determined to survive. The first thing he had to do was just keep swimming. He was more scared of drowning than anything else, so he kept telling himself to keep going, terrified of what would happen if he stopped. Sometimes that was easier than others. One moment he'd be as relaxed as he could, floating on the Clumsy, and the next he'd be pulled under the surface by a rip current. Thankfully, James was a construction worker and was used to working long hours of hard physical labor. He might have been dragged under if he hadn't been as fit as he was. He also somehow managed to remain calm because he remembered hearing that panicking was the worst thing you can do if you're trapped at sea, and he managed to keep his cool by taking long, deep breaths whenever he started to feel stressed. Slowly, the minutes turned to hours, and he managed to fill the time by focusing on things that would keep him alive. He made up songs and sang them out loud and thought about his 9-year-old daughter and how badly he wanted to see her again. After a few hours of floating, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his leg. Then another, and then looking down, he realized he'd drifted into a bloom of jellyfish, and they were stinging him all over his body. James had to muster up all of his energy to swim through them, with each sting causing him excruciating pain. After a while, he managed to get clear, but it wasn't safe just yet. Then he spotted a fin about 15 feet away, and he knew that the Gulf of Mexico is famous for its shark population. He wasn't immediately sure it was a shark, but then he ducked his head under the water to look, and he could just make out that it was big and it had a long, flat mouth. Then, faster than he thought was possible, the creature was on top of him, bumping into his leg. He immediately kicked as hard as he could and screamed and shouted, hoping to scare it away, and this either worked or wasn't a shark or it just wasn't interested in him. Either way, he breathed a sigh of relief when it turned and swam off. As the sun began rising on Thanksgiving Day, James realized how hungry and thirsty he was. He started to scan around to see if there was anything to eat or drink, but there was only seawater. Then, just up ahead, he spotted something in the water. He wasn't sure if it was a piece of wood or bamboo, but he reached out, took it, and chewed on it anyway. It tastes okay, and even though it probably had no nutritional value, it at least made him feel like he was eating something. Afterward, he kept on floating.
Hold on, I missed something. What was he pretending he was eating, you guys? Hold on, what did he say? I guess I can throw back. Seattle Judy. My lovey, how are you? This channel is owned by a beautiful person who you all love. I do too. Oh, I love you, Seattle Judy. You're the best. You are the best ever. You're always so sweet. How's your mom doing, by the way? Hopefully well. You guys, what did he say he was eating? Or that he was supposed to be, or that he was pretending to eat. What was that? Was I the only one that missed that? Am I gonna have to roll it back? Were you guys not paying attention either? That was sus. I'm not sure what he was eating. Didn't they just hold on, I'm gonna roll it back because I'm like, I could have sworn that's what I heard. Like he was pretending he was eating something, or I don't know. Go on.
It had a long, flat mouth. Then, faster than he thought was possible, the creature was on top of him, bumping into his leg.
Oh.
He immediately kicked as hard as he could and screamed and shouted, hoping to scare it away, and this either worked or wasn't a shark or it just wasn't interested in him. Either way, he breathed a sigh of relief when it turned and swam off. As the sun began rising on Thanksgiving Day, James realized how hungry and thirsty he was. He started to scan around to see if there was anything to eat or drink, but there was only seawater. Then, just up ahead, he spotted something in the water. He wasn't sure if it was a piece of wood or bamboo, but he reached out, took it, and chewed on it anyway. It tastes okay, and even though it probably had no nutritional value, it at least made him feel like he was eating something. Afterward, he kept on floating, wondering when rescue might
Oh
come.
my gosh, I
The
wonder
night
what he
before,
ate.
pretty quickly, his sister had
You're
started to
right,
get
Maddie,
worried.
it didn't.
When he didn't come back from the bathroom, she thought he might have gotten caught up in one of the other parties on the cruise, but she was
What
also
the hell
sharing a
did he
cabin with him,
eat?
and when he didn't return that night, she decided to tell cruise ship workers. The cruise liner immediately began a search and rescue operation, retracing its steps from the night before. They also contacted rescue services, who let other vessels in the area know that somebody was overboard and to help look for them. And it would take until the following evening for them to find him. At 8:25 on Thanksgiving night, James spotted a tanker in the distance. By then, he was sunburnt from the hot sun and shivering in the cold water.
Yay, they
He
found
was also
him.
so weak and in so much pain from the sunburns, but he knew he had to keep swimming. Finally, when he got close to one of the ships, someone spotted him. They shouted out to their crewmates for help, and then they strapped a flashlight to a life preserver and threw it as close to him as they could. But unfortunately, the waves kept pushing it back every time James tried to reach it, and he was clearly losing strength. After a few attempts, one of the guys in the boat yelled to him that the Coast Guard was on its way and to keep treading water. It would only take another 15 minutes for a helicopter to appear. It shone its spotlight in the water, but kept missing James, so he pulled off his socks, pants, and boxers and then waved them above his head. When the spotlight finally caught sight of him, he thought he could even hear one of the Coast Guard shout "Gotcha" before they winched themselves down into the ocean beside him. The Coast Guard then threw a rescue sling around James, who just collapsed into it with every bit of his strength gone. He might have only been seconds away from drowning. He was then airlifted to the hospital and treated for hypothermia, and to this day, James swears that he wasn't drunk and has no idea why he passed out or how he ended up in the ocean. Apparently, despite the ordeal, he's keen to go on another cruise, but has promised to stay at least 10 feet from the guardrails. If you've
Okay, that was the first one. That was actually interesting. I'm glad that they found him. Phyllis said, "Woo!" I know, right? She's 88. It's a big butt, which she did often. I think. Oh, that's awesome. That's good to hear, love. I forgot these are survival stories, so this is going to be like kind of some good news, at least what some of these are with all the stories.
If you've ever wondered what it's like at the South Pole, there
Ooh, we're going to the South Pole, y'all. Oh, I wish I was at the South Pole. It's so hot over here. Let's pretend. Come on, let's roll, guys. Going to the South Pole.
is actually a way you can visit.
Okay.
At least 10 feet from the guardrails.
I'm gonna stop pressing buttons. I feel like the expert right now.
If you've ever wondered what it's like at the South Pole, there is actually a way you can visit. The Admonson Scott South Pole Station has between 50 and 200 people living there at any time, ranging from scientists doing research to engineers, operations, and support staff who keep the center running. A few tourists also fly in during the summer to experience the raw beauty of what is possibly the most remote place on Earth. The best way to get to and from the site is by booking a seat on a specially designed aircraft from New Zealand or Chile. These flights only run in the summer between November and February, and only when the weather allows it. And if you do manage to get there, generally visitors can only stay for a few hours on clear days before flying back while the weather permits. The staff
It didn't say what he ate, did he? You're right, huh? They never said what he took a bite out of. He wasn't taking a bite out of crime. We know that.
and support staff who keep the center running. A few tourists also fly in during the summer to experience the raw beauty of what is possibly the most remote place on Earth. The best way to get to and from the site is by booking a seat on a specially designed aircraft from New Zealand or Chile. These flights only run in the summer between November and February, and only when the weather allows it. And if you do manage to get there, generally visitors can only stay for a few hours on clear days before flying back while the weather permits. The staff that man the station spend the whole year on site, usually on a one-year contract, and brave the worst of the summer and winter months. In addition to the extreme cold, the Antarctic winter is one long night, or 6 months of near total darkness. The lack of light and the extreme cold also make it too dangerous to fly there in winter, so if there's a problem, it's up to the overwinter staff to fix it. As you might imagine, when living somewhere so remote and challenging, there's no shortage of injuries. But because the population is so low and the people working there are trained to be as careful as possible, they rarely need more than one medic on standby in case something happens. The station's medical officer is usually a tough and experienced physician, and in the 1998-1999 season, that post was filled by Dr. Jerry Nielsen. Jerry, like other doctors at the station before her, had extensive experience. After graduating from the Medical College of Ohio, she worked in several hospitals, building a reputation as an excellent emergency room doctor. Then, after a painful divorce, she needed a change of scenery and somewhere she could escape from it all and get past the heartbreak. When she saw a wanted ad for a new medical officer at the South Pole Research Station, she couldn't imagine a more exciting place for a new beginning. She would even call Antarctica a blank slate in which you could write your soul. After arriving, summer on the ice came and went, and it was pretty uneventful. An injury here, a little sickness there, and then in February 1999, she watched the last plane until November take off and prepared for the long winter months ahead. As part of this preparation, Jerry thought it was vital to ensure that she was healthy before checking anyone else. There were people on the base that knew how to give first aid, but she knew that if she was ever too sick to do her job, there was a serious problem, especially in winter. About a month after the last plane took to the air, Jerry was performing a routine self-examination when she found a small lump in her breast. She wasn't exactly sure what it was, but she knew it wasn't there the last time she checked. Obviously, she had to find out what it was, but unfortunately, although the station's medical center is well equipped, anything non-invasive like a mammogram wasn't an option. There were scientists at the station who might be able to check what the lump was if she could get to it, but there wasn't anyone with any training in doing that sort of procedure. Even Jerry wasn't all that experienced in that specific procedure. Her specialty was emergency services, a role which was perfect for the Antarctic station most of the time, but not something like this. She decided to ask for advice from colleagues in the US via emails and teleconferences, and after lengthy discussions, they could only come up with one solution. Experienced or not, the only person there with the skill to do that sort of surgery was Jerry. She would have to perform a biopsy on herself. So she assembled a small team from other medically trained personnel and began practicing by extracting cells from inside raw
On
chicken using a
herself?
hypodermic syringe.
Ooh.
When she felt confident enough, Jerry got her medical crew together and broke out the biopsy kit she brought with her. Inside were 2 needles and 2 syringes. One was a 25 gauge, which was a small and thin needle she'd need later in the procedure. The other was
That
a
chicken
bigger
is freaking
22
out
gauge
too, by the
needle,
way.
half a
Raw
millimeter
chicken.
across. She attached it to one of the syringes and then filled it with the sedative lidocaine. While the team checked her vitals, she jabbed the needle into her right breast a few times, pumping a little of the anesthetic to deaden the region around the lump as best she could. Then she took the other needle and syringe and plunged it in, piercing skin and connective tissue until she could feel the resistance from the small tumor. She then jabbed the lump and pulled back on the plunger to extract as much material as possible, which was then sent off to be analyzed. Unfortunately, when the sample returned from the lab, it was the worst news she could have possibly gotten, which was that it was inconclusive. Their equipment was too old to say whether she had cancer or not, so she contacted the US again for more help and a new plan. It didn't take long to come up with one, but they knew that landing a plane at that time of year was too dangerous. However, they had done emergency drops in the past. Although it was too dark and too cold to land, a pilot could still fly to the South Pole and follow the ring of fires that staff had lit outside the station. Once spotted, they'd drop the supplies down on parachutes. So on July 11th, a US military aircraft flew out of Christchurch, New Zealand with better testing equipment and medical supplies, including chemotherapy drugs. Once the cargo was recovered, a new test was done, and it turned out that she needed the medication after all. Jerry had an aggressive form of breast cancer, and she still had months to go before she could reach a hospital. The US government immediately started to work out how to get her home early, but the best they could do was the beginning of October. In the meantime, Jerry returned to her small medical team and taught them how to administer chemotherapy so she could begin treatment while waiting to fly out. It was a tough time, but Jerry refused to stop working, patching up hip injuries and prescribing antibiotics until the rescue planes landed. Finally, in October, when the weather improved, Jerry and the scientist with the hip injury were flown out of the station on October 15th. After she returned to the US, she began treatment, including multiple surgeries and a mastectomy. For 10 years, the cancer went into remission, and Jerry spent that time lecturing about her ordeal all over the world, including back at the Antarctic station and in a memoir. Tragically, in 2005, her cancer returned with a vengeance, spreading throughout her body, and sadly, she passed away on June 24th, 2009. Mount Nebo is a small community.
That one was kind of sad and crazy, right? Okay, so here's, I think this is the last story on here. I dropped, oh man, I should have let Maddie drop it. He could drop it again. But yeah, right. Rest in peace for sure. I agree. Oh, that one was sad. But yeah, there's his link if you guys are not subbed up to him. He's cool. Okay, next, onward.
Small community roughly 11 miles west of Brisbane, Australia. The area is home to just over
Australia.
400 people, and with such a small population, the thin scattering of buildings is almost invisible on a map. The woods surrounding it, on the other hand, are over 40 miles long at their longest and 12 miles wide and follow the contours of the D'Aguilar mountain range, which borders farmland and many communities on the northern end of Brisbane. It was in this beautiful green landscape on the 15th of September 2019 that 54-year-old Neil Parker chose to go hiking, as he often did. He was a founding member and experienced guide of the local bushwalker club who had covered this route many times before. And not only that, he was a member of the Australian State Emergency Service, which is a group of different support agencies covering everything from fires, floods, earthquakes, motor vehicle accidents, maritime rescue, and helicopter search and rescue, which he had done for years at that point. To describe Neil as prepared would have been an understatement. He would normally have been the one coming to people's rescue, if not for a simple twist of fate. Along Neil's route, about 40 minutes off the last major trail and an hour and 40 into the whole trek, was a small waterfall along Cabbage Tree Creek cascading down a shale cliff. This cliff is shaped like a row of shelves or a ladder, and the shale made for an easy climb, and it was a common part of Neil's route. Approaching it, he tucked his walking poles into his bag and began the ascent once more, looking forward to the beautiful view from the top, when something moved under his hand. The lichen along the rocks had begun to dry out in the Australian spring, and its roots had weakened. Frantically, Neil reached out, trying to grab a hold of another ledge, and briefly managed to do so before his momentum ripped the stone from his hand and he tumbled down from a height of 6 meters or 20 feet. He slammed into another ledge on his left side, flipping end over end before landing in about a meter of water at the bottom of the falls. Thankfully, Mount Nebo isn't especially large and neither are its waterways, so Neil wasn't in great danger of drowning. But as the moment passed and he came to rest on the shore of the creek, he knew he was in a terrible situation. Neil's left leg had broken just above the ankle during the fall and was so badly damaged that the foot was only attached by soft lip tissue. His left arm was also broken above the wrist, leaving a whole side of his body physically useless and preventing him from using a crutch to walk. He knew he needed help badly, but the mountain valley left him with no cell signal to speak of. Worse still, when he tried to put the phone back in his pocket with one hand, it slipped away and was lost in the creek. On top of all of that, Neil had enough experience as a hiker and rescuer to know that no one was going to find him there, even if they knew he was missing. And right at that moment, no one even knew that he was missing. Maybe a degree of complacency had caught up with him, or maybe he'd simply gone hiking here so often that he didn't want to be a bother telling people over and over again. But either way, no one knew he was there that day. To add insult to injury, the emergency beacon he would have normally had with him, which would have gotten him rescued immediately, had been left at his ex-wife's house during their separation. And while the normal mental image many people have of Australia is of wide open savanna, Mount Nebo is anything but. The tree cover is so dense in most places that even where trails and streams are marked, they're often completely invisible beneath the canopy. Having been a part of rescue teams before, he knew how hard it would be for them to see him where he was. So, the one and only way Neil was going to be found was to do it himself. He was going to have to crawl. Knowing this, and knowing there weren't any more chances he could afford to take or resources he could squander, he pulled out his first aid kit and used his walking sticks to make a splint and reset his shattered ankle by hand. Then he tied it in place with bandages and put his left arm in a sling. He could only hope that these shattered bones hadn't caused serious internal bleeding. Even so, the process to do so would have been agonizing under the best circumstances, but Neil was forced to do this with only one working hand and some over-the-counter painkillers. The best chance he had of being found was a part of the trail roughly 2 miles away, where he knew some of the locals liked to jog for exercise. Neil could only hope that someone would be there, but to get there, he would have to undertake the hardest challenge of his entire life. Ingeniously though, Neil tied his broken leg with a length of bandage to the still working elbow of his broken arm in such a way that he could pull his arm forward and lift his foot off the ground, effectively hog-tying the left side of his body. This saved him from having to drag his broken foot along the ground, which ran the risk of further damage, but also meant he would need to lift the weight of his leg and carry it every time he crawled. For some very rough math, let's say Neil could pull himself between 5 and 10 centimeters or 2 to 4 inches at a time with just his right arm and leg, given that the ground is uneven. That averages out to about 40,000 repetitions. Consider still that the general rule for hiking over rough terrain is that every step takes 2 steps because you have to constantly go around objects, up and down hills, and so forth, and that Neil would have to do all of this in excruciating pain. So in total, that's a minimum of 84,000 repetitions, or far more as he lost strength and made less progress as time went on, all with only the food and water that he had on him for a short 3-hour hike. This ended up being so great an effort that he needed to stop and rest every 1 to 1.5 meters, or every 3.5 feet to catch his breath. Neil made his way inch by inch down the mountainside, following the side of the creek, out of Sunday and then into Monday. That first evening, he saw a rescue helicopter fly overhead and it became clear just how hard a time they would have seeing him where he was. Exhausted, Neil spent the night huddled under an emergency thermal blanket he brought with him and rationed the little bit of food he had, which was a little more than a handful of nuts.
I paused right at a handful of nuts. Sneaking in, move over, stop poking. You'll get us kicked out the theater again. I know, everyone behave. Actually, you guys are fine. OMG, I sprayed my ankle. Oh my god, it was painful. Choosy, that was the curse of the ex-wife. Yamaha. Phyllis brought the popcorn. I'm trying to figure out who snuck me in the booze. Was it you? Were you supposed to bring me the booze? Wait, hold on. Let's finish the story.
A trail bar and some candy. Finally, on Monday morning, when Neil failed to arrive at work, a series of phone calls began. His employer called Neil's ex-wife, who further called other members of Neil's family, his sisters, friends, and so forth. No one had seen him. But Neil's journey had only just begun, and he spent the entirety of Monday continuing to crawl down the mountain. His progress measuring in hours what he could have previously walked in just a few minutes. As Neil pushed himself, the thought that kept him going was his son. They hadn't spoken in years, and he wasn't ready to leave things off like that. Neil had to make things right, and he wasn't ready to give up and wither away on a mountainside. On Monday afternoon, one of Neil's friends received a concerned phone call, and when asked if he knew where he was, that friend remembered Neil mentioning a hike earlier in the week. Finally, there was some indication of where he was, and Neil's own Bushwalker Club sprang into action alongside his family. Dozens of people who knew him and had spent years hiking with him set out into the wilderness in search teams, and word passed those he worked with in the emergency services. That night, Neil found a clearing farther down the creek and slept out in the open, hoping that someone would see him this time. When he awoke, the pain, hunger, and exhaustion crept up on him from the full 2 days of effort, and he lay there recovering for some time. But then, thankfully, around 10:30 that morning, the whirring of a helicopter approached. Shocked back into action, Neil did his best to be seen this time, picking up the reflective foil blanket and waving it with his good arm, before finally the helicopter came closer and closer and he saw that it was a Queensland Government Air Rescue helicopter. Moments later, a search and rescue technician rappelled down to see him. They stabilized Neil's injuries as best they could and loaded him into a rescue basket. By the end of the day, he was admitted to a hospital in Brisbane in good spirits and talking to reporters and reunited with his family and friends. He fully intended to return to hiking, but said he likely won't return to extreme stuff, even if it's in his nature to be adventurous. Hello everyone, my name is Sean and welcome to Scary Interesting. I'm still deciding on whether or not this will be a permanent series, but in the meantime, if you have a story suggestion that you think will fit this series, feel free to send it to the email in the description. We also have a Scary Interesting Discord, which
Okay, hold on. Hold, please. I think we got one more to watch. Did you like that one, Phyllis? Did you like that one, Phyllis? That was a good one. I told you it was kind of it is a new thing he's doing with the let's see, survival stories. Okay, so I think he might have one more. Let me check. Hold, please. Hold, please. All right, let me know if you guys can see it and hear it. This is going to be this is one of the bedtime stories ones we haven't seen, but I'll drop their link, or yeah, I'll drop their link again, unless Maddie wants to get it. I already have it locked and loaded, but Maddie's having so much fun.
In previous episodes, we have examined cases in which people have allegedly traveled through time, alongside common.
I've been wanting to watch this one too. Yeah, so give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear it and see it, okay? Oh, and I'll make me less big. There we go. That hurts. What happened? What hurts? Just someone hurt you? You want me to take that off? They're ours. Phyllis, you ready to get freaked out? Phyllis likes these type of stories. She like this one I've been wanting to watch, so it's about traveling through time and stuff like that. Time travel from bedtime stories. Hold on. I got you, love. There you go. Just drop it. Sub up to them too. They always have good stuff. Like interesting little. I like their artist too. He does good animation. Okay, you guys can hear it though, right? I think you said you could, right? Yes, no? We don't know? You guys can hear it, right? I think you guys said yes. I don't know. I'm a hot mess. Not as hot of a mess as yesterday, but still slightly a hot mess. Can I get a bark if you guys can see it? Arf, arf, arf. Come on, bark something. Tell me you guys can hear it and see it. Okay, thanks, Maddie.
Common inconsistencies that are all too often associated with the reporting of such incidents. At some point in the far future, has humanity discovered the means to journey back to its distant past? Or are we so enamored with this concept that it somehow In previous episodes, we have examined cases in which people have allegedly traveled through time, alongside common inconsistencies that are all too often associated with the reporting of such incidents. At some point in the far future, has humanity discovered the means to journey back to its distant past? Or are we so enamored with this concept that it somehow blinds us to logic and reason? Stories of individuals traveling through time, either of their own volition or through some misfortune, can be traced back in various forms for several centuries. But amongst the wider field of unexplained phenomena, much like UFOs or shadow people, detailed and documented instances of time travel remain a relatively recent concept. In the oldest of such examples, many cultures possess similar tales in which notable figures have fallen into a deep sleep and have somehow been
I totally agree with you on that, Phyllis. I could think that. I can see that. Totes.
propelled into their own future or dragged into the past to commune with themselves or their ancestors.
Look, Phyllis.
For the vast
Jinx,
majority
how
of
funny.
these stories, the time traveler is relatively helpless, finding themselves unable to influence the strange force being exerted upon them. They end up spending the duration of the tale acting as an unwitting pawn, moving around at the mercy of some higher power. It would not be until the turn of the
Okay, I promise, I'm not gonna unpause it every 5 seconds. But if y'all could time travel, what era would you pick? Or would you pick the future? If you could either like go forward or go backwards, like pick a time or date, or where would you want to go if you could time travel? I know, Phyllis. That's why I said I was like, Jinx. But yeah, so okay, guys, in the chat, if you could time travel or go back to any, time period, what time period would it be? Or if you could go to the future too, like either one.
Of the 19th century, that protagonists in moving around at the mercy of some higher power. It would not be until the turn of the 19th century that protagonists in such stories would be presented as having some degree of control over their own fate. The idea of humanity developing the ability to visit a specified point in time under controlled circumstances quickly became popular in literary circles. Gradually, stories of time travel involving the use of arcane spells or magical totems came to be replaced with the construction of a machine or electronic device. From this point onwards, mankind would utilize science rather than magic in order to achieve its desired goal. And this notion would come to a head in 1895 with the publication of an iconic novel by British author H.G. Wells. The description of the device utilized in the time machine changed public attitudes towards the concept of time travel virtually overnight. Suddenly, readers began to believe that such technology might one day become a reality, like so many of the author's other predictions. In time, the line between fact and fiction has begun to blur, as rumors and reports of people who have apparently been encountered outside of their own timeline have found their way into the mainstream media. Many of these stories have now been accepted as genuine examples of time travel, only for closer scrutiny of them to suggest otherwise. But it was with the advent of internet forums and chat rooms that belief in time travel and of visitors from the future finally achieved a foothold in society's perception of such things. In this episode, we will examine 3 of the most famous examples and try to divine how much, if any, truth there is in each of these cases. In the closing months of 2000, internet chat rooms became saturated by rumors of a time traveler from the future who was visiting modern-day Florida in order to recover legacy technology. As more and more people began to search out his work, in February of 2001, this enigmatic stranger finally revealed his identity to the world as John Titor. Titor's description of the future he had traveled back from was bleak, to say the least. Towards the end of the noughties, America would be consumed by a vast political civil war. This would rage on for several years, finally culminating in a global conflict, during which the US and Russia exchanged nuclear ordnance. With large parts of the United States subsequently rendered uninhabitable, the survivors formed new city-states, with the nation's capital relocating to Omaha in Nebraska. As the conflict had been coming to an end, Titor was fighting as an infantryman for the state of Florida, but then went on to join the newly formed National 177th Temporal Recon Unit. Career soldiers such as Titor had been selected by the authorities to utilize newly created technology in order to return to the past to collect essential resources. These would then be used to repair and update what hardware and devices had been salvageable following the end of the war. At the time of his writing, Titor explained that he had initially traveled back to the year 1975, as at that time, his grandfather had been working at IBM as part of the team developing their 5100 computer model. This particular device contained several unique features, which could be used to cleanse and repair similar technology in the future. As more and more people began to question his account, Titor gradually revealed more detail. He explained that having acquired the device, he had chosen to stop off in this timeline to collect personal belongings and photos from his old family home, but would soon go on his way. When asked about his time machine, Tito replied that he was a soldier and not a scientist. Although he did not know the specifics of the science behind the device, via his training, he did possess a working knowledge of it and some understanding of its component parts. Amongst these, he listed cesium clocks, an electronic injection manifold, and magnetic housing units. During the course of a 4-month period, Tito posted somewhere in the region of 570 replies, before announcing that he was finally ready to return to 2036. After this, all further contact with him ceased, and in the years since his apparent departure, elements of his story have gone on to provoke fierce debate. Experts have come forward to confirm that components described by Tito as being part of his device were consistent with scientific theory about time travel. Alongside this, the intricacies he described in relation to the IBM 5100 do exist, and would not be familiar to anyone outside the computer industry. In addition to these findings, several incidents mentioned by Tito in his account of America's future have also come to pass. His description of an imminent pandemic in the country was quickly followed by an outbreak of mad cow disease, although some now believe he may have been referring to a more obvious candidate. He also identified that no evidence of atomic weapons would be found following the fall of Saddam Hussein, as well as predicting a high-profile Chinese space launch in 2003. But critics are keen to point out that in the 20 years since the Tito messages were posted, many more of his predictions have not come true. These include the Olympic Games being indefinitely cancelled in 2004, the outbreak of the US Civil War in 2008, and a nuclear conflict in 2015. So is this proof that this alleged time traveller was nothing more than a fabrication? Proponents of his writings point out that by choosing to post his glimpses of the future, Tito may well have changed the timeline himself. They also argue that other incidents such as a disputed general election and a rogue US president, whether you believe that refers to Trump's unpopularity with the mainstream media or alleged controversies around Biden's win in the last election, indicate that Tito may simply have been mistaken about the dates he gave. Several high-profile investigations into John Tito have been funded over the years, with a number of individuals identified as potentially having pretended to be him, although nothing has been conclusively proven. As more time passes since he made his predictions, Tito's believers have gradually dwindled, even though America has not been so politically divided since the Civil War. It may just be that his prediction of a new civil war is not as far-fetched as originally thought. In March of 2003, a number of media outlets in the United States broke the story of how federal investigators had arrested and charged a stock trader with fraud. It was alleged that the man in question had managed to accrue a $350 million portfolio from an initial investment of just $800. Naturally, this eye-watering level of profit had alerted the US Security and Exchange Commission, who had in turn contacted the FBI. As a result of their investigation, federal officers had then managed to identify the individual concerned as 44-year-old Andrew Carlson. It was reported that on the morning of January the 28th, FBI agents had conducted a raid at Carlson's home address, where they had detained him and then removed him in handcuffs. After a 4-hour interrogation at the local field office, the trader had subsequently been charged with fraud and remanded in custody for a court hearing. The reason this story was more widely reported than other such crimes lay in the alleged testimony offered by Carlson during his interview with the agents. When asked how he had successfully made so much money, his reply was that he had traveled back in time from the year 2256 and had used historic financial records which he had memorized to make his vast fortune. It was further reported that in an effort to have the charges against him thrown out, Carlson had made a number of spectacular offers to the investigators. These included divulging the location of Osama bin Laden to the United States government, as well as revealing cures for certain viruses. With his attempts to gain freedom falling on deaf ears, elements of the media readied themselves for what promised to be a spectacular court hearing on the 3rd of April, only for further apparent intrigue to take place. The hearing had been cancelled, as the defendant was now nowhere to be found. It was claimed that a mysterious individual had come forward, fronting Carlson's $1 million bailout bill, and no sooner had he been released from custody that the alleged time traveler then immediately disappeared from the face of the earth. During the 17 years which have elapsed since the incident, it has proven impossible to verify any of the elements concerning the case. There is nothing to confirm Andrew Carlson's birth or death, with no documents to be found pertaining to his alleged arrest or arraignment. Many believe the story was a work of fiction, crafted by a smaller news outlet, and then unwittingly amplified by larger media organizations. And yet, there is still a significant number of believers who state that there is an explanation for this lack of evidence. If Carlson had traveled back from the future, there would be no record of his birth, as he had not yet been born. And if the US government had accepted his offers of information, it's quite possible that they secretly liberated him from prison, or even killed him, ensuring they had hidden any possible evidence that he had ever existed in the process. Whilst doubts over the existence of our first two alleged time travelers exist, the same could not be said for the third and final case study, a Missouri
Okay, this guy, I feel like he's staring right at me.
resident named Mike Markham. He achieved notoriety when in 1996 he claimed to have created a working time machine, but his movements and ultimate fate following this remain an enduring mystery. There is no question that Mike Markham was a real person, with birth and banking records for him easily accessible, as well as documents detailing his subsequent brushes with the law. During the early 90s, he was to be found residing in the city of Stanbury, where he was studying to be an electrician. Then, in January 1995, Markham was arrested by officers from the Gentry County Sheriff's Department, following the recovery of stolen property which had been located during a search of the 21-year-old's home address. The items in question were 6 powerful electrical transformers, which had been stolen from a power station in neighboring King City. Upon being released from prison several months later, Markham had proceeded to give an interview to a local radio station, where he had admitted to stealing the transformers. Whilst he had been using them, he had inadvertently caused a localized power outage, and it was this that had brought the police to his door. He went on to explain that prior to the incident, he had been experimenting with a modified CD laser to reduce the air resistance between 2 poles. As he had done so, he had noticed a circular vortex of heat forming in the continuous arc which was now passing between the 2 points. Mystified as to what this manifestation could be, he had tossed a metal screw into it. The item had promptly disappeared, only to rematerialize a few feet away. On making further efforts to replicate the phenomenon, Markham's equipment had overloaded and caught fire, which is what had prompted him to steal the higher spec transformers. Mike Markham used his interview to announce that he believed he was close to achieving time travel, asking for help and financial support from the audience, so he could travel back in time and win the lottery to benefit both himself and his backers. A year passed before Markham was then invited back onto the radio show to provide an update. Emboldened, He explained that he had used donations from listeners to successfully replicate a rotating magnetic field within his machine, and that he was not far off using it to make his first attempt to travel back in time. Not long after this, Markham was reported missing, and a search of his home address by the police found no trace of him, save for large amounts of electrical equipment. For several weeks, local residents puzzled and speculated over the fate of the missing student, before an unknown caller contacted the same radio show with some intriguing information. They claim that in the 1930s, an unidentified corpse fitting Markham's description had been found lying on a beach in California. The body was that of a young male, who was apparently crushed to death inside some kind of metal cylinder. When the authorities had managed to free the remains from inside, they had located what sounded very much like a 90s-era mobile telephone, clutched in one of his hands. It is indeed an intriguing theory that Markham somehow successfully managed to travel 60 years into the past, only to die in the process. But more rational explanations have been put forward, with some claiming that he fled public attention to live elsewhere in the country under a newly assumed identity. More recently, a number of users of internet forums claim to have seen him living homeless on the beaches of Hawaii, begging for money to get back to the mainland and to help fund his continuing experiments. Certainly, in Markham's case, as opposed to those of Titor and Carlson, there seems an outside chance that the mystery surrounding his disappearance may perhaps one day be solved. The overwhelming lack of tangible evidence surrounding the cases of alleged time travel that we have already examined, such as those of Rudolph Fentz or the Zanetti train, seem to be in keeping with the overall subject matter itself. Few scientific ideas have produced as much fierce debate or oppositional theory as time travel. From the exact mechanism of how such a feat may be achieved, to the potential consequences or side effects of accomplishing a successful trip to the past, it seems that the scientific community is still no closer to agreeing on the finer detail of the concept. The inclusion of propositions such as wormholes and infinite dimensions only add further argument to the debate, raising yet more questions than answers. And it is argued that the fact there has never been any definite proof of a visitor from the future successfully arriving in the past is clear evidence that the technology does not and will never exist. It could be that such visitors have already arrived, but have gone unnoticed by society, or perhaps choose to keep a low profile out of fear of their presence altering too much in the future. Perhaps, in the fullness of time, we will know one way or the other.
Boomer in the house. I was just trying to make the rest of my boomer booms feel good about themselves. Misfit, you missed it. Maddie was going crazy in the chat, dropping links like nuts. He's doing a good job. He's loving it. It's so funny. You missed it. You have me beat by one. I'm dead. Oh, that's a good one. I told Misfit, it's okay. I have like 2 friends too. He's having me by one. Oh, he's such a dork. All right, that was good, Phyllis. You were on it. That guy did wind up like dead on a beach. How did you know? Just tell me. How did you know? Look, see, he's doing it. I'm like, watch. Everyone's gonna try to steal him from me or try to throw wrenches at him now. Don't sell your pets to buy lottery tickets. That's good advice, to be quite honest. Right? Phyllis knew. Phyllis was calling that the guy was gonna end up on a log somewhere. She's like, he's gonna wind up dead to infamy. All right, y'all. So that was a cool little chill stream. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm sorry to keep laughing. Oh, I'm sorry to keep laughing. Never just for me. I like girls. Nice. All right, guys. But yeah, so I will see you guys tomorrow's Tuesday. Yes, I will see you guys. Well, today's Tuesday, I guess. Wait, no, it's Monday. Forgive me, already trying to push it. Yes, I will see you guys today or tonight/tomorrow. So, oh yeah, and don't forget to hit the like on the way out.